So with the big anticipation, at least for me, about the new Shadowrun Returns game coming out this summer, I thought, why not take a brief retrospective on the original Shadowrun games for both Sega and SNES. There's been maybe a bit of a debate about which one is better. And for me, after really thinking about it, the Sega version, to me, is the more superior. They're both very good games, to say the least. They are both worth owning. But the major differences, well, are pretty simple, really. First, let's get into kind of specifics. The Genesis version of Shadowrun was actually made by Blue Sky. These are, by the way, these are also the same guys who were responsible for the Vector Man games, also another very good series of games that were unfortunately rather short-lived. The Super Nintendo was developed by Beam Software, also known as Melbourne House, and then later known as Studios Melbourne. And the publisher was Data East. And for those who may not be too familiar with Beam Software, they're the guys who made the Nintendo game Nightshade, which I also own. It's pretty good. It's a good combination of adventure and a little bit of action and some puzzle solving and searching and such like that. Now, to get down to the bare bones of it, they're both very much the same. They're both RPGs. They're both shooters. They're both action adventure. There are a lot of similarities to them, but there are some pretty big differences. The stories between the two are vastly different. Though, when you boil right down to it, they are both about revenge in the end. The major difference is, of course, the Sega version. You can actually choose your own custom character type, whether it's a street samurai, a hacker, or a shaman. Whereas in the Super Nintendo version, you're pretty much just all three. And that really doesn't work for me, more specifically when, according to the rules, you can't actually have it that way. But, and then of course there's also the fact that the hacking mechanics in both games are very different. The Sega version is a lot more specific in that when you become a hacker, not only do you have to worry about having to get the data jack enhancement, you also have to get your own cyber deck. You have to customize it with numerous different programs and such, and you also have to be quite fluent in hacking. So a lot of the Matrix runs in the Sega version of Shadowrun are a lot more do run a lot deeper, and there are some more specifics to it, and it is a little bit harder, whereas in the Super Nintendo version, it's very simple, and it's just there. And that, for me, was just, well, it was just that. It was just too simple. Yeah, Matrix running in the Sega version is a bit more of a pain in the ass, especially when you run into programs that will, ICE-protected programs that will either completely destroy your cyber deck or just steal certain programs from your cyber deck that you have to then go out and rebuy. Yeah, that can be really tedious and a pain in the ass, but it does offer a much more deeper experience. For example, when you hack and when you steal data storage from certain Matrix spots in the Sega version, you can then take whatever you stole to a rigger, and you can make some really sweet money off of it. In the Super Nintendo version, the only time you hack is when it's part of the story, in order to get information for the story. You do also hack in the Sega version for elements of the story, but the Sega version has a much more of a sandbox feel to it. You can do a lot more of whatever the hell you want to do. For another great example, there are no gangs in the Super Nintendo version. In the Sega version, you can interact with gangs, you can join gangs, and you'll earn some game bonuses. Like, if you join all of the gangs, I forget exactly what happens when you I mean, I know what happens when you join the York gang, in that every single time you hail a cab, every cab ride is free from then on. Whereas in the Super Nintendo version, you can pretty much just travel around the trains for free anyway. But the major difference here is that the world in the Sega version of Shadowrun is that it is much, much bigger. And in the Super Nintendo, it is actually pretty small. I think there's only maybe 3 or 4 different levels. I think there's about 5 or 6 in the Sega. Guns and magic feel about the same. I think magic is probably a little bit better in the Super Nintendo version. You will certainly use it a lot more in the Super Nintendo version. In the Sega version, for me, every time I made a character, I would always just go with a hacker. Because a good majority of what you're going to be doing a lot of the time, and if you want to make a lot of money, you're going to want to hack a lot. Karma is certainly earned differently. And here's another major difference between the Super Nintendo and the Sega version. In the Sega version, you can actually take on other Shadowrun jobs from Mr. Johnson's, about 3 or 4 different Mr. Johnsons on varying different levels of difficulty. In the Super Nintendo version, there's just the main storyline. You can't take jobs. You can hire on other Shadowrunners to help you out, but there's no other jobs to do. The only other way to earn money is by killing random bad guys and whatever money that they drop. In Sega, you can do random Shadowrun jobs based on their varying difficulty, and if you succeed, you can make a crap load of money off of it. And you can also hire on other Shadowrunners, whether they're hackers or mages or other street samurais. And they can really help you out in the end. Karma is earned through, in the Sega version, either through odd random events, like they feel like random kind of cinematic events, but a lot of the time they turn out to really be nothing. And then the rest of the time they're earned sometimes through combat, and then the rest of the time through completing Shadowruns. In the Super Nintendo version, you earn them from combat, essentially. What else is there? I had a whole list of stuff written. The music in both games is good. Obviously, the Sega version is a little bit, sometimes be a little bit heavier, a little bit rougher, and certainly fits the mood properly. The Super Nintendo version is good. Yeah, I mean, like I said, both games are really good and are certainly worth owning. My only negatives are essentially what I already mentioned. My problem when I first started playing the Super Nintendo version was that when you start off right away, you have nothing. You have no money, you have no weapons, you have no armor. And when you first go out on the streets, you're immediately being shot at by guys from windows. You do get a gun pretty quickly, but once you figure out, where you need to go, like the first thing that you need to do if you don't want to die is you need to find your apartment, but I think first you have to find the key to your apartment building, and then you can get inside and you can heal and then you can save. And distributing karma is pretty much the same. You rent a room, or you go to your apartment, you rest, and then you can distribute karma however you want. I think, I'm trying to remember if there is a difference in distributing karma. I think in the Sega version there is a lot more specifics in distributing karma, such as to your skills and your attributes. Though, when you boil right down to it, I think it is pretty much the same for both games. So, overall rating, I would give Sega Shadowrun is maybe a little bit harder, mostly just in terms of certain Shadowruns and certain gigs that you have to do. They're both fairly challenging games, but they're both very enjoyable. If you can find either copy of the Sega or the Super Nintendo, I would recommend that you get them both. I remember I found mine originally already used game store going for probably about $30. The Super Nintendo version, I think I had to order it online. I don't remember how much I had to pay for it, but nonetheless, they're pretty rare and pretty hard to find nowadays. If you can find it for a reasonable price, I would recommend you get it. Rating. I would want to give the Sega Shadowrun definitely a 9 out of 10. Super Nintendo, well, I'm going to have to give this one an 8 out of 10. As for the new Shadowrun Returns, I've been trying to find out as much information on it as I can, but not much information is really being shared. There is a video out online of the alpha beta playthrough right now that was done by the creators. And now, I don't know what the specifics are going to be as to when you create your own character, how customizable your own character can be down to whatever race or whatever class or gear loadout, weapon loadout, magic, hacking, cyberware, and such. I don't know how specific it's going to be. I really hope that they give you the ability to make your own character however you want to make it and play however you want to play. Nonetheless, I am really looking forward to this game. It's been a long time since we've had a really good Shadowrun game, and this looks like it could be it. So, check out the video for Shadowrun Returns. It's up on YouTube. I'm sure everybody has seen it. And there you go. See ya.